Okay, so we're picking back up where we left off when we talked about Hawaii. Okay, we had talked about Alaska in the last video. Now we're going to talk about Hawaii. The initial rationale for annexing Hawaii, annex just means to bring in, is because of a huge investment in Hawaii sugar markets. Americans had invested quite a bit in these sugar markets, and the idea was that if we bring Hawaii in as a territory, we avoid the U.S. import tax. Now, essentially what that means is that Hawaii is its own independent nation. These American investors were investing in a foreign market, so when you went to bring the sugar into the country for refinement or for sale, you have to pay the U.S. import tax. Well, if Hawaii is a territory, at the very least, you don't have to pay that import tax anymore. And we're going to get to that whole mid-Pacific location for naval interests. We're going to get to that here in a second, so you might want to jot that down as well. There's actually a couple of there's an early attempt by President Cleveland because of some resistance that is shown. Hawaii resists. Okay, Hawaii does not give consent to be annexed under President Cleveland, and he shows sympathy by backing away from the table. However, McKinley in 1898 becomes much more aggressive, and they are annexed anyway during that time period. And the Hawaiian Queen, she's going to give up power essentially to avoid bloodshed. Okay, she does not want to see her native people killed in a violent attempted overthrow, and that is sort of the story of how we come into possession of Hawaii. I think the biggest key here is to understand that Hawaii is not a willing participant. The Hawaiian people did not want to be a part of the United States. It was really an economic and a military grab. And that's the next part that we're going to talk about is the military, both the trade, but also the military importance of Hawaii and also of Alaska, which is where we left off last time. So I just want to kind of show you a map here. This is sort of the Pacific theater, if you will, if you're thinking in terms of World War II, which we are rapidly approaching World War II. Japan is not discovered. We knew Japan was there, but there's an American naval commodore named Matthew Perry who sails into a Japanese harbor in the mid 1860s, and when he does, and he sets up relationship with the local Japanese. He realizes he's the first to sort of open the door to trade in Japan. Well, what you should notice is that if you were to go from California all the way over to Japan, that is quite a journey. And during this time period, our ships are powered by steam. So you could get, with the best technology, about right there with the amount of coal that you could fit onto a steamship. And once you get to where that red X is, you're out of coal, which means that your steam engines can no longer move, which means you're stuck, basically. You need some way of getting all the way across the Pacific Ocean. And what we're going to settle on is you need like a gas station. Okay, you need a gas station, only with, instead of gas, with coal. Well, if you look at Alaska, which this is the chain of islands that sort of tails off of Alaska, and if you look at Hawaii, they're not quite exactly halfway. There is an island, I want to say it's right in there, called Midway Island, because it's literally midway between the United States and Japan and the mainland of China. But here in Alaska and here in Hawaii, you can put these things called coaling stations, whereby you can sail your ship from California up to Alaska, refuel on coal, and then make your way to Japan. Okay? And the same can be said going from California to Hawaii, not in a straight line, actually in a straight line. I just can't draw with my mouse. So these coaling stations are going to become very important. That's sort of your economic and your military importance of having these two locations. Is we need some way of refueling our refueling our trade ships and also our military vessels that are going to protect them. So that's the other reason why Alaska and Hawaii are so vitally important. Now, the Spanish-American War, again, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. The Spanish-American War, 1898, this is called the Splendid Little War, and it's over the island of Cuba. I would like to point out that Cuba is about 90 miles off the coast of Florida, so we're right in our backyard. The citizens of Cuba had been revolting against their colonial ruler Spain since about 1895. There had been isolated skirmishes as a part of a larger revolt. And we decided to get in on the action for two big reasons. One is that it is very close to the United States, and two, because it is a big player in, once again, the sugar industry. Now, those are sort of your political reasons. Your reasons for sort of the average American to have an interest in Cuba are twofold. One is very positive, one is very negative. Negative meaning we're against, there's a group of people that's against involvement in Cuba, and those are your big business people. They actually support Spain because they want their investments protected. Okay? A stable Cuba means a stable sugar market. And in the eyes of a lot of large-scale business owners, they see Spain as a stabilizing force. So they would much rather stay out of this conflict and let Spain do what it is that they need to do to control the island. Now, I add parenthetically that there's some really not good stuff going on in Cuba that the Spanish are doing. But nonetheless, that's sort of the desire of business people is, let's just kind of let it be. Let's let the area stabilize on its own. The average American sees Cuba's cause as like our own with Great Britain. They see the Cubans as an oppressed people that are being put upon by a European colonizing force. And so the average American would have very much supported American involvement in Cuba to sort of free them from the oppressive Spanish. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and this is kind of different to think about, is the press, and I believe that that's going to be our next slide, is talking about the American press, and this cannot be overstated. There we go. The American media is going to play a huge role. There's these two guys that they're going to be on the next. They're going to be on the next slide, but Hearst is referenced there. The American media plays a huge role in pulling the United States into war with Spain. There's this thing called yellow journalism, and yellow journalism is a sensational, exaggerated style of reporting, generally is less accurate, and the whole idea is to lure readers. You're going to have these really massively impactful and sometimes embellished. So you want to think about yellow journalism as the precursor to what we would call today as clickbait. Those articles that you see online that have these really sensational headlines that really grab your attention. That's kind of what yellow journalism was. There was this letter published called the DeLome letter that embarrassed the United States. It called our president a weak and ineffective leader. And that sort of gets the American public riled up. And the United States decides to send the USS Maine to Cuba to, just to have a presence in the region, also to get some Americans out of Cuba, but it somehow ends up being destroyed. And that's going to cause some potential problems. And we're going to see why here in a minute. Okay, now, what's going to happen is that the Maine ends up triggering war. And so this is where we're going to get into this thing called the Spanish-American War. Because, and I guess I went one slide too far. Hold on just a second. Because there's no mention here of the controversy surrounding the USS Maine's explosion. There we go. These two newspaper editors, Hearst, and Pulitzer, they both are going to allege that the Spaniards sabotaged our ship. Now, in all actuality, and this is kind of skipping down here to the bottom, probably the explosion was most likely caused by a fire within a coal deposit on the ship, and that fire would have heated the magazines to the point of explosion. So in all actuality, it's probably an accident. But Hearst and Pulitzer, they're going to allege that it's the Spanish. Now, why would they do this? Well, again, they're trying to sell newspapers. Okay, they want the more salacious headlines, and to say, well, it was just an accident, that's not going to sell a lot of papers. So at the end of the day, they are going to stir the public into sort of a war fever. Okay, and I believe that gets us to our next stopping point. I believe, yes. Maybe not. No, we got two more. It's going to trigger the war. The war is going to take place in two main fronts, or in two main theaters. One that we're going to expel pretty quickly is the Philippines. Okay. We're going to talk about the Caribbean here in a minute. The Philippines, some reasons that we're going to attack there. One, Spain is not expecting an attack there. Spain, this is the Philippines. You will notice that it is very close to China, so we're way over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. It's a long ways away from us, let alone Spain. They had influence there for quite a while. Two, and this is going to become important later, we had the support and the cooperation of the native Filipinos. This guy named Emilio Aguinaldo is going to support the American cause because they feel like they're going to be liberated by the Americans. And that, look, the third point is that we have a superior navy to the Spanish. The Spanish give up pretty quickly in the Philippines. There's not a ton of battles against the Spanish that take place in the Philippines, at least nothing that we're going to focus on here. Now, the other theater is the Caribbean, mainly in Cuba. Some of the reasons that, some of the struggles that we had despite being just 90 miles away from our coast is, one, we have a relatively weak army. We're still fighting basically with an army in terms of tactics and in terms of technology from the Civil War, from the mid-1860s. And here we are at almost the turn of the century. We didn't have the right type of supplies. We are not going to be used to fighting in sort of a tropical climate, okay? That hot, humid, sort of draining climate that is the tropical climate. We're not used to that. And again, we're the Civil War. That's the last time that we would have been engaged in any type of warfare. And so it's been a solid 40 years almost since we've engaged in any type of warfare. The last thing to finish up here is going to be the famous Battle of the War. I would argue really the only significant battle of the war is the Battle of San Juan Hill, or the charge up San Juan Hill, led by Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. The result of the battle is that the United States wins, and Spain fails to escape a naval blockade. Their fleet is destroyed, and they have to surrender. And that will set us up for our acquisitions from the Spanish-American War, the Splendid Little War, which is going to be our next video. So stay tuned for that.